Welcome back to Conversations with Kate and Carrie, and we are so glad that you are joining us today. And we are excited because we have a guest, and she is joining us all the way from Tampa, Florida. And you gotta love how, although none of us were terribly excited when everything went virtual and everything that kind of came out of that lovely COVID experience a couple of years ago, and still going through. However, one of the things it did do is it made incredibly more every day for us to have some lovely guest speakers from all around the country. And today's going to be one of our guest speakers is also an author. So Jeanne is an author of a children's book. And we're going to talk a little bit about that children's book and how it makes you feel. So Carrie, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you met Jeanne? Maybe even show us the book. And I saw you over there.
Yep.
And then we'll just kind of jump into some conversation about the book and we're get to know you a little bit better.
Okay. So Jeanne Meta and I have the same, writing coach company, which is called Self-Publishing School. And so we're in a mastermind together. And she was talking about her book and I was like, hey, I've got a podcast. I'd love for you to, it sounds like your book would be a good book for early childhood educators. And would you like to come play? And she said, yes. So like we say, you have to have coaches. So Jeanne and I both have writing coaches. I didn't even ask who her current coach is, but my guess is we've probably at least worked with one in common over the past year or two. And the book is called, What is Artemis Afraid of? So Jeanne, tell us, what is Artemis afraid of?
Everything, turns out. Well, she's based on my grand dog, which is a Chihuahua. And if you have been around Chihuahuas, they're just jumpy and afraid of things and run and hide. And then there are, a lot of joy and fun too. But so I based Artemis is on my little grand dog. And then Glory B, her friend, is the little girl that's wise and, helps her deal with her feelings. And that's based on my granddaughter, who's now just turned 4.
How lovely. So what made you decide? Okay, so what you don't know, Jeanne, is that for literally probably the last year or so, maybe even the last 2, we have often talked about, Carrie mentioned it a little bit about the importance of having coaches and everything a coach can help you through. But we've also talked a lot about having side hustles or side gigs, but also not necessarily waiting to make some of your goals happen. So tell me a little bit, what made you decide that this was a book that you wanted to write? And what was what's your goal of writing this book?
Good question. I have written, and journaled my whole life. I've used that to express myself, but I had this parenting book that I wrote first and self-published first in 2019. And I was, and that's a nonfiction. And I was planning to write another nonfiction book for adults. So I was going through the self-publishing school, coaching and everything. And they had a children's book section. I thought, oh, no, that's not for me. I can't rhyme. Who am I? So I didn't even think about that. And then as I was starting to write, I just wasn't excited about it. And then my granddaughter was having these issues with being really fearful. And I thought, what if I could write her a book that would help her, and of course help other people too, but help her specifically with understanding that it's okay to feel afraid and that it's perfectly normal to have feelings. And so that's how it worked out. It was not really an idea and, just came to me in the middle of the night or something, said, go ahead and do it.
All right. So wait a minute. So if I just heard you right, you just said that really this book was written as a tool to help your granddaughter who was afraid.
Yes.
Wow. How wonderful. Okay. So our directors who are listening, this could be a great resource for them to incorporate into their classroom and curriculum. So, Carrie, using your curriculum brain, how would you, if you were a director and you heard our podcast and you're like, well, that sounds interesting, how could we use that? What would you tell a director? What would you tell a director about getting this book? You've read it. I've read it. We know that Jean's read it.
So, I mean, a lot of times in your pre-K class, your pre-K 3, pre-K 4, pre-K 5, you'll have one or two kids who are just timid, and they can get lost in the kerfuffle of a classroom. You know, there's 15, 20 kids in the classroom, and if one of them is just starting anytime there's a big noise, or like hiding behind furniture when someone new comes into the classroom, it's hard for the teacher to always recognize that this is a child who needs extra support. And it can get to be a little much for some teachers. And that's something you see in this book, right? That she's hiding during a party. Come on, it's a party. Her human helps her through that. And so if you've got a child at your program who's having stranger anxiety well past the age, you know, they're 2, 3, 4, and they're still having a stranger anxiety, this is a great book to introduce, and doing it at this classroom meeting or circle time, instead of, I'm just going to read it to the kid who is obviously scared. Because the other thing about Chihuahuas is not everybody realizes that they're scared because they bark a lot. And you may have that happen in a classroom too, right? You have a kid challenging everybody, you know, people because they're afraid.
Okay, can we come up with a teenage version of this book? How about an adult version of this book? I've got some. Can we make it a comic book for the teenagers, maybe even the adults that, you know? Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. I mean,
that are challenging.
Yeah, that are going
that are fearful, you know, that they have their own anxiety. Because I mean, to be honest, I mean, we all have that adult friend that needs to read this book about the Chihuahua, and because we're not taught about learning feelings. That's what I loved about your book. Is it kind of reminds me, Carrie and I were talking about the fact that this isn't a subject that there's a lot of books available, and so it's a great way to kind of introduce just learning to use the words. Kids aren't exposed enough to the vocabulary, and as adults, most of us know 7 feeling words, and you know, we have more than 7, and so we're sad, we're mad, we're angry. That's about it. Happy,
hungry,
like,
hangry.
I didn't even come up with 7, right? You know, so and that's it. But yet, you know, if you're looking at a feelings wheel, right, like there's all these words, and it's a great opportunity for us as educators, and really us as directors, to help our educators learn how to help the kids start to identify those words.
Yes.
And you have, in the back of the book, you have a section for the caregiver. So what were some of the things that you brought up there that you think are important for caregivers, whether they're teachers or whether they're parents?
Well, thanks for asking. You know, my coach at the time was Elaine, and she is wonderful. I said, you know, I was thinking about putting a note to caregivers in the back but you know, the lessons are pretty obvious, you know, when you read the book, because what's obvious to you is not necessarily obvious to everybody else, you know, so go ahead and put what you want. So, you know, I used examples from the book, from the story, and that's what I hope educators, parents, everybody that reads it to a child will kind of pause and say, hey, have you ever felt like that? Or, oh, did you notice that Glory B, you know, took the time to listen instead of just, you know, keep on reading. So in the back, I put just notes on what was going on in this story, and here's the lesson, kind of, here's something to talk about.
It reminded me of Oprah's book club.
Oh,
Because you think about it, right? Oprah's book club at the end of her books, they have discussion questions. And so to me, it was the kids version of Oprah's book club. So, maybe we started a thing. I don't know.
oh, that'd be great.
So now we just need to get Oprah or some version of an Oprah, maybe Kelly Clarkson. We need somebody to have their own version of a kids book club, complete with the discussion questions for the kids. Dolly Parton. There we go. Imagination Station.
There you go.
It could be Dolly Parton. It could also be Miss Rachel. Miss Rachel is, blowing up on YouTube.
Well, but I'm trying to think of somebody who has, Imagination Station already sends out millions of books, and they're geared at that 0 to 5. So if those parents were given discussion questions at the front of the book of when you get to chapter 6 or page chapter 6, let's be realistic, page 6 or page 2, right? What an awesome tool for the parents and teaching the parents on how to read a book. Because I think a lot of us make an assumption that parents know how to read a book to a child. And yes, anything is better than nothing, which is, huge, right? And if we're giving them the books for free, that in itself is such a wonderful tool. But, I think that the book is great. Hopefully, folks will definitely look for more. So maybe Artemis will have some additional feelings in the future that we'll get to explore with Artemis.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not sure if it'll be feelings, but I want to have different
emotions.
Yes, different situations that you can help your kids. Because I like stories that entertain, but then there's a lesson in them. Which most kids books do have, but that's kind of my mission.
Okay, I want to just pivot real quick because you said you also wrote a book for parents, and I just want to talk a little bit. I want you to share a little bit about that, because that's another thing that we as educational leaders need is resources to give parents when they're struggling. So tell us a little bit about that book as well.
Well, this was really my passion project, that I had thought about and wrote a lot of it over 20 years. And I did not know how to get it published, but I finally did. So it's called Parenting Well After Childhood Abuse, which, oh, here it is. Here it is. Parenting Well After Childhood Abuse. Because I was sexually abused as a child, which, now is becoming more and more of a topic of conversation, which is good, because shining light on abuse of any kind is very helpful in helping to eradicate it, right? Mm-hmm. You can't just keep it in the shadows. So, and parenting is tough, no matter who you are.
Absolutely.
But when you have parents that don't support you, that are actually abusive or emotional, physical, all these things that millions of people experienced, children who are now adults, are either afraid to be a parent because they're like, am I going to keep the cycle going? Or how do I do it differently? And almost all survivors do have a drive inside to get better, to do better, and to, do a really much better job for their kids, which is what I had. So I had to start from square one, mostly, and find resources and find books and magazines and TV shows and other moms to talk to. And so that's why I wrote the book, is to help others that were probably struggling just like I was.
So I have a question for you, Jan.
Sure.
Where can somebody find both of these resources? Because these really are great resources. These resources are going to be in our show notes. When, if you're listening to the episode versus watching the episode, make sure that you go look at the show notes. If you found us on social media, make sure you go look in the post, because chances are there's some links in the post or in the comments. We'd love for you to be able to check them out. But Jan, where's a great place for people to check that out?
Well, there's the great big Amazon that has, my books. You can just search my name, Jan Mehta, but also janmehta.com. is my website, and there's links there of where you
Okay. And that's GeanneMeta.com.
Yes.
All right. I just want to make sure that we get that spelled out there correctly for folks who are listening.
Yeah.
And I love the topic. I really do, because we do have directors all over who listen to us literally all over the world.
Fantastic.
It's been kind of an interesting thing to kind of to grasp as a podcast. And like you said, this is a definitely an issue for adults who, have struggled with this, and it has been unfortunately a secret that we just didn't talk about.
Right.
So
well, and
Carrie, you look like you had a question or something you wanted to say.
Well, I just wanted to say, I think, I kind of wish I could buy books for everybody who's listening to the podcast, but I don't know your mailing address, person who listens in Helsinki. But it's available on Amazon, so you can get it on your version of Amazon, Amazon.co or Amazon.aus, or, all the different Amazons, you can get it.
Yes. It's also at Barnes and Nobles and other places like that. I went, wide on distribution. And I also recorded an audiobook with this book, which is something
With which one? The parent one or the kid one?
The parenting. No, I mean, children's book on an audio, I guess it has uses, but no, I did it myself and I had to learn quite a bit about audiobooks, production. I'd never done that before, but that was fun. And it's a very personal thing, so it was great to do with my own voice. But it's a parenting book too. Even if you grew up at Disneyland, you could get some good practical stuff out of this book, because there's a chapter on dealing with teenagers, about accepting feelings, about, all kinds of things. So I tried to write a parenting book, but my angle was coming from abuse, because that was my experience.
Yeah, dealing with the triggers.
Yeah.
And I would say also, sometimes people go into teaching because they have those kinds of traumas. So it might be helpful also to have in your teacher resource library, because teaching a class is different from parenting, but there is some significant overlay.
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
You're with the kids longer periods of time than their parents are sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, Jeanne, if you ever make it over to Texas, or if you decide to start doing any sort of professional development and training and workshops, please let us know. We'd love to have you join us. But with that, thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully we didn't keep everybody too off kilter on the East Coast. And
No. No, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Not a problem. All right, Carrie, you want to close us out?
I do. I want you guys to, if you liked this episode, please go buy one or both of Jeanne's books, and review this podcast in whatever podcast app you are using, and share the show. We'd love to see you. Okay. See you next time.